One of the most turbulent and brutal periods of European history was the French Revolution, and in the aftermath of the execution of King Louis XVI and the Queen Marie Antoinette, people were being dragged to the guillotine, where they lost their heads daily. During the Reign of Terror, as it was known, 17,000 people were executed, and the man who oversaw this and the architect of the terror was Maximilien Robespierre. His control of the National Convention led to so much suffering and evil, and anyone who was suspected of hiding and harbouring any form of sympathy for the monarchy were dealt with terribly. Robespierre oversaw one of the bloodiest periods in European history, and he showed little to no remorse for this, and in the aftermath of the king's execution, he became the most powerful man within France. But like the king and queen, Robespierre would be turned upon, and he too went to the guillotine after people had had enough of his regime of brutality. It took one drop of the guillotine to bring his life to an end. But after his execution, his remains were dug up, and his grave was opened. But he is today buried alongside the remains of thousands of others inside of the catacomb of Paris. Today we look at the disturbance of Robespierre's grave, and to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Robespierre rose to the position of the President of the National Convention, but his short period in control was terrifying. He was known for his position as a member of the Committee of Public Safety, and he believed that following the overthrow of the monarchy, that terror was essential to stomp out any form of pro-monarchist sentiment. He wanted to make sure that no one questioned the revolution and his ideas, and because of this, thousands of people were executed. Even the wives of executed men were dragged to the guillotine after the tears they shed for their beloved, who had lost his head minutes before, were considered anti-revolutionary. It was a very dangerous time inside of France, and the terror ramped up under Robespierre's oversight, and he was acting like a perverse and sadistic dictator. He ordered the National Convention to bring in a huge change to religion in France, and to instigate a new religion known as the cult of the Supreme Being. However, due to the horror inside of France, Robespierre was universally disliked, and he would become a figure of hatred. He was eventually arrested, and within a day, the injured Robespierre was put to death, and he was executed. He had been conspired against by rebels to bring him down, and he was brought to his execution on the 28th of July 1794 inside of Paris. One person who witnessed his execution stated that at 4 p.m, the sinister procession moved out of the courtyard of the Palais de Justice. No crowd of such a size had ever been seen in Paris. The streets were choked with people. Spectators, men and women of all ages, filled every window, and men had climbed onto the rooftops. There was a universal jubilation, coupled with popular fury. The long-suppressed hatred against these criminals now exploded with double force. Everyone applauded wildly and seemed to be sorry they could not do more. Most of the watchers fixed their gaze on the cart in which Robespierre, his brother, Caution, and Henrot were riding. These miserable creatures were all mutilated and covered with blood. They looked like a band of brigands the gendarmes had surprised in the forest and were unable to arrest without inflicting serious wounds upon them. It would be difficult to describe the appearance of Robespierre. His face was wrapped in a bandage of dirty, blood-stained linen. His features were horribly disfigured. A pale pallor made it even more repulsive. He kept his eyes downwards and almost closed. Whether that was from the pain of his wounds or an awareness of his misdeeds, one cannot say. Just before arriving at the place of execution, Robespierre was shaken out of his lethargy by a woman who forced her way through the crowd and rushed up to the cart carrying this cannibal. She grasped the cart rail with one hand and threatened Robespierre with the other, saying, "Monster spewed from hell! The thought of your punishment intoxicates me with joy." Robespierre opened his eyes and looked sadly as she said, "Go now, evildoer, go down into your grave, carrying the curses of the wives and mothers of France." When the cart had reached the foot of the scaffold, the executioners carried the tyrant down and laid him out prone until it was his turn for execution. While his accomplices were being beheaded, Robespierre appeared to not be taking notice. He kept his eyes shut and did not open them until he himself was carried up the scaffold. Some said that when he saw the instrument of death, he heaved a sigh of pain. But before dying, he had to endure bitter suffering. After having thrown down his coat, the executioner roughly tore away the bandage and splint which the surgeon had put on his wounds. This unhinged his lower jaw from the upper jaw and caused the blood to flow in torrents. The wretched man's head was now no more than an object of horror and repulsion. When at last it was severed from his body, and the executioner held it by the hair to show to the people, it presented an indescribable, horrible sight. Thus perished the fiercest of the savage beasts, the most monstrous criminal that nature ever conceived. On the 2 days that followed, 83 other rebels were put to death, mainly members of the Commune or their outlawed accomplices. His head had been taken clean off, and with this Madame Tussaud was ordered to create a death mask of Robespierre, and she took a cast of his head after it had been taken off. She moulded this at the foot of the guillotine, and then created a wax head of the tyrant from this. Tussaud had also done this with the French Queen Marie Antoinette, but the people were incredibly angry after Robespierre's execution, and there was a fear that his body would be ripped to pieces. Because of this, there were conditions put in place to stop the public accessing his corpse, and his remains were taken to the Arancis cemetery in Paris. And they were not buried in an individual grave, but his head and body were placed inside of a mass grave. Many people who were buried in this cemetery were those who had lost their heads on the guillotine during Robespierre's terror, but the architect of the bloodshed would also be buried here. As the revolution continued, the cemetery where Robespierre was buried became very full, and with this further burial grounds were searched for. But many of the bodies within the cemetery were in a bad way, and their identities could not be worked out when they were exhumed. The restored king, King Louis XVII, even looked for his sister, but he could not find her body. Inside of the Arancis cemetery, Robespierre was exhumed during the clean-up of the graveyards, and along with hundreds of other people's corpses, his bones and remains were dug up, and they were then taken to the catacombs of Paris. Underground, these ossuaries would hold the remains of around 6 million people, and lots of these were those who had been guillotined during the French Revolution. Robespierre's remains are inside of the catacombs somewhere, but his remains have yet to have been located, and it would be practically impossible to find them due to the sheer amount of bones in the catacombs. But discovered inside of the walls of a chapel in Paris are a set of remains that some have claimed belonged to Robespierre, and some of these makeshift coffins are covered in leather, and it's believed that these contain the bones of important people. Robespierre was one of the most ruthless leaders in European history, and his popularity quickly went downhill as he would order the guillotined executions of thousands of people. He was someone who was involved in a shootout before he too was arrested and executed. But still, the remains of Robespierre today are probably missing under the feet of many inside of Paris who pass over the catacombs every day. Thank you for watching, and to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. And again, thank you so much for watching.